But this is in our museum now. I think we find a better specimen which is being prepared, but that's the skull of an oreodont. But these were once so abundant that collecting parties would just step over them. Now you find a lot of them, but they seem to be pretty well weathered and broken up. Well, here's some of the teeth of an oreodont. You find a lot of those, and they're quite diagnostic. Notice the size of them, but notice this tooth in here. If you take another tooth and put it over this and then clamp it together like you'd go working in a jaw, why, it's like a scissors. It's great for shredding grass on these grasslands, and that was probably one of the reasons why they became so abundant. And we believe they were called cud chewers. Teeth well adapted for chewing coarse grass. Now here's an interesting specimen. This is the brain cast of an oreodont. Of course, after these creatures die, why then the soft parts will decay, leaving a cavity in there, and then that fills in with sediment and hardness. And then you have a brain cast in here. You don't find very many of those anymore. But here's another. Here's a camel. Putatherium in here. Well, they lasted until about the Pliocene, about 2 or 3 million years ago, but it wasn't very big, maybe a couple feet high, probably about the size of a sheep. But they, before they died out, they migrated into South America, and they became the llamas down there. But the three large groups of mammals here, the camels, the rhinoceroses, and the horse, they first evolved in North America. And then before they died out, they crossed that land bridge into Eurasia and then down into Europe, into Africa and here. But why they died out, we don't know. The horses, of course, died out maybe during less than 1 million years ago, and why would they die out? It seems like the environment was well suited. Grasslands, they had long legs, they could outrun predators, but yet we don't know what caused many of these creatures to become extinct in here. Well, that's the skull of a camel. Not a real good specimen. Maybe someday we'll find a better one. But I might mention here that these fossil collecting journeys that we make are, we do this under a permit issued by the U.S. Forest Service. They're pretty kind to us. I mean, I think we're a lot more easy to get along with than many of the ranchers and agate hunters and people who want to turn this place into a wilderness area, things like that. But this here is a predator. Hyaenodon hornidus lived through the late Eocene and Oligocene, a time interval representing the formation of the Badlands. But we believe that these may have hunted in packs like the modern-day rhinoceros in the plains of Africa today. But they're belong to a group called creodonts. They died out, but they're not a carnivore like most of the modern-day bears and dogs and creatures like that. All belong to the group called carnivorous. But that's a reconstructed of what they look like. And here's a specimen that you found, Kathy. It's probably the lower jaw of a H. horridus in here. Those teeth, they weren't meant for, they didn't evolve for eating grass. But now here's a place, we're about 2 or 3 miles northeast of Scenic now. Here's the Shadron Formation, and this is here we're getting up into the Brule. But right along the contact, we find a lot of tortoises. Now, just why they live there, we don't know. Many of them, we believe, may have lived in burrows. But they're near that Shadron Brew contract in here, right at the contract. And you find those over large areas of the Badlands. Well, here's a young collector here. She's found a tortoise in here, Stalmaeus in here. So it's a well-preserved specimen. It's small, and it's complete. It has all the shells to it. Some of these will even have color markings still left on them in here. Excellent state of preservation with all of the shells, the scutes that form the carapace on it here. But now here's a large specimen. This fellow's about 2 feet long. It probably weighs about 200 or 300 pounds. Now, why it's upside down, I don't know. I mean, maybe Earth movements caused this. Maybe it died that way. But it's a big fellow there. Took us a day or so to dig this fellow out. Well, how do you transport something like that? And so anyway, the students, they managed to build a litter to carry it on. So here it is. It's wrapped up in a plaster of Paris jacket, and they put it on their litter. Now they're going to have to carry it about a mile. Lucky we had 2 strong boys here, but they were pretty well worn out when they got back to the road and at the cars in here. So they had to walk about a mile. There they are carrying the specimen, but way out in here is where the vehicles were parked. So that's a little bit of a trek. Well, here's one of the prime fossil collecting localities. This is about 5 miles west of Scenic, the town of Scenic, but it's now closed out. This is a valley called Indian Creek. It's about 5 miles long and 2 or 3 miles wide. There's excellent collecting in here for many years. And so we used to go down there, but going back to about in the 1970s, 80s, this area down in here was owned by ranchers and by the Forest Service. They each had parcels of land. The ranchers probably had several acres, and so did the Forest Service. But gradually over time, the Forest Service got control of the complete valley down there. And of course, you have a lot of problems now, people wanting to go down there. First, you have the ranchers. They want to run their cattle down in there. And there's another fellow up here, he wanted to run bison down there. Well, bison are a vicious animal. And then, of course, there's agate hunters. There's 2 or 3 clubs of agate hunters. They hunt these fair-born agates along the creeks in here. So they want to keep this open, and so do the wilderness people. Now, they want to make it into a wilderness area. And so the Forest Service is under quite a bit of stress. They get about 30,000 requests for information or for permits a year. Everything from somebody wanted to put a building in or run a road across it. And so sometimes getting permits is kind of difficult. But anyway, about 2 years ago, the Forest Service, they ran a survey up and down this valley, and they found an endangered species of plant. Now, they're doing that in a lot of places throughout the West. Why then, of course, if you have an endangered species of plant or animal, then you can't have people down there. But now, evidently, this is, they say it's closed out. So we had to go somewhere else, northeast of Scenic, a couple miles to do our collecting in here. So I don't know what's going to happen to this. Forest Service seems to like us because we're less offensive than most of the rest of them. I've been over there already at their Wall Ranger Station. There's been some pretty vicious arguments, especially when prairie dogs from the Forest Service are migrating onto the ranchers' land and making big holes there, and so they battle each other. And So we don't know what's really going to happen to this area down in here, but we'll go down there anyway and take a look at it. So this here is Indian Creek. It's meandering. And we had a permit up until about 2 or 3 years ago going 5 miles up that valley. So you have to jump that creek there. Now here's a view of the creek. Now this, it's a sand bottom. Usually it's pretty hard. You can run a vehicle over, but it's interesting that if it gets something like along the banks here, if that gets too much water, then it turns into quicksand. And so some of these banks are at least 5 foot high, so you have to try to get up those. And there's at least, well, I think there's about 10 or 15 of these before we get to that collecting site at the upper end of this valley in here. Well, here's someone who made it. You recognize that? That's probably Dan's Gila monster there, a diesel-powered vehicle. It's great for pulling other vehicles out of the muck. But of course, trying to get up these embankments, you see a vehicle with a long wheelbase like this is difficult. Now a Jeep with a small wheelbase is a lot easier to do it. You get hung up here, and then you got to dig your way out. Well, here we got a flat tire. But notice it's only flat on one side there, so we just turned it around and away we go. Well, I thought I'd include that just to show you that we academically aren't completely devoid of mirth and humor. Yeah. You get a flat tire, that's the least of your problems. Well, let's go see, we're down in Indian Creek now, and of course the Shadron and the Brule are above us, but this here is we pass a bank of Pierre Shale now. This is the oldest formation exposed in the Badlands. Usually you don't consider that to be Badlands, but yet it's part of that particular area in there. But it's a dark gray shale between 65 and 75 million years old. That was laid down during the Cretaceous period when shallow inland seas spread across what is now the Great Plains. But of course, the sediments that form these beds came from the rising Rocky Mountains in the west, and all you get in here is layers of volcanic ash. But you can walk these Indian Creek many miles and you don't find a fossil. And all of a sudden you will come to a place where it's just loaded with specimens. And what's the reason for that? We didn't have any answer for that for many years. Now, many of you may have heard about these black smokers that they find in the modern day seafloor, like along the mid-Atlantic ridge. It's just masses of boiling water coming up. It's black, they call them black smokers, and it's loaded with various types of minerals like iron and sulfur, various types. And that is a excellent type of environment for certain types of anaerobic bacteria to live. And so they feasted on this sulfur and iron that was coming up, and then of course this is part of the food chain. Then you start getting various invertebrates like clams and snails and that living off of that, and then come in the larger creatures like some of these marine reptiles. And many of them died right there. But all throughout Wyoming and the South Dakota, you find mounds of shell material. They're actually much more resistant than the surrounding rock, and so they'll stand up like humps in many places. And they're just loaded with shells. So we believe that those may have been some of these smokers on the bottom of that Cretaceous seaway. And black water mixed with all these different